Hey there, and welcome back to Tuesdays with Joe, where you ask your most burning UX questions and I answer them. Let's get to today's question. This comes from Steve, who says, I've got a very limited amount of time to interview users, roughly 15 minutes for 6 users each. Do you have any strategies to make the best use of my time because it's so limited? Thanks, and keep up the good work. Well, Steve, it's a very good question, and it's actually a situation a lot of people find themselves in. If you're allowed to have FaceTime with users at all, you very rarely get the time that you would like. So the critical thing that you do, especially when you're pressed for time, is that you don't want to narrow your focus too much, okay? Because you don't know what you don't know at that point. So the thing you absolutely do not want to do is you don't want to ask them a specific question about a specific part of the app, okay? You don't want to ask about how would you use this menu, or how would you use this feature, or how would you use this function, or if you had to do this, this, and this with this app, what would you click on first? You don't ask those kinds of questions, all right? And I'm going to tell you why. What you do instead is you ask a very open-ended question like this. Walk me through how you would do A, B, or C. That's it. Nothing about the software, nothing about the user interface, nothing about the system, open-ended. You ask that and you let them fill in the gaps, all right? Here's why. If you ask about specific parts of what's on the screen, you're gonna get a very narrow answer. And what they speak to you about may not be where the real problem exists, right? If you've got a span of 15 minutes, you can only cover so much ground. So if you miss the mark, right? If your assumption about, well, I think they're having a problem doing this, is wrong, and you ask only about that specific thing, there's probably 100 other things that are distinct possibilities that you're not going to hear about, okay? The other important part about asking open-ended questions is that you'll hear about things that they do well outside the software and the system. You'll hear about process, okay? And if you have to choose between tasks and process, process is infinitely more valuable to you at this phase of the game, right? That's where the real opportunities for improvement are. So if you ask an open-ended question like I suggested, walk me through how you would do this. From the time you come in and sit down at your desk, walk me through your day, all right, for example. You'll hear about a lot of things that don't have anything to do with the app, the site, the system. You'll hear, well, I get interrupted every 15 minutes because someone is always poking their head in here, and then the system will log me out because there's inactivity while I'm having this conversation. I'm trying to get back to my work, and then I have to start all over again. You just heard two things. I get interrupted, it logs me out too soon, I lose all the work that I've done. Okay, possibilities. You'll also hear about workarounds, things that they do to avoid using certain parts of the system. For example, you'll hear, at this point, what I usually do is I print this out, I make a copy of it, and I walk down the hall and give it to Bob, and he usually sits on it for about 4 or 5 hours until he can get back to me via email, and then I go back to his office, I pick up the piece of paper, and then I enter in all that data, right, to avoid something. When you hear something like that, when you hear about some crazy thing that somebody is doing, which is actually more effort on their part, to avoid using what's in front of them, that's an opportunity for improvement. That's an opportunity where UX is severely lacking, or there's a feature or functionality that's missing, and you really stand to develop something, to improve something, to put something out there that essentially is the answer to that person's prayer, okay? But again, you will hear about none of that if your questions are too specific, all right? So open-ended questions, stay away from specifics as to the features, the functions, the menus, the look and feel, the workflow, whatever it is. Don't ask about any of that. The other thing I want to say before we wrap this up is that I got an excellent piece of advice years ago from a consultant who was visiting at an organization that I was doing some work for. And I sat in on this meeting, and there were just 4 or 5 pearls of wisdom I walked away with that I thought, I'm gonna use this for the rest of my life. So I wanna share one with you, and it relates to interviews. When you ask that question, ask it and then zip it. Be quiet, don't say anything. There will be, 9 times out of 10, an uncomfortable, awkward silence. It's very tempting to fill that silence with your own voice. Because it's a little nerve-wracking, it's a little awkward. Don't do it. What I heard, what this guy told me, and what I'm telling you is let the silence do the heavy lifting. That silence is what allows that person the space to sort of walk through it in their heads and think about it and focus on it and sort of get their mind around what they want to say to you. If you interrupt that space, they lose their train of thought as well. Okay, so it is tremendously important to let the silence do the heavy lifting. Let the silence work to help them answer the question for you. Okay? I hope that's helpful. Feel free to drop me a line, Steve, and let me know how this goes. I'd love to hear from you. And always remember to give good UX.